Mr. Mihály Rosonczy-Kovács. He's International Director, Nézőpont Institute. Welcome, sir, to TVP World, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Dziękuję bardzo.
It's a pleasure. So before we actually start, there's a short video that I'd like to share with you and our audience, and I'll take your comments on it afterwards. Oh, okay. Well, we're still waiting to load that up. We'll hopefully get a chance to do that later. Let's get started though. So please talk us through what is behind this surprise visit, and clearly a visit that has upset many senior EU officials. What was Prime Minister Orbán's thinking?
It's important to handle the two visits at the same time. They are parts of the same peace mission, as Viktor Orban called it. The first, also, it is important symbolically, obviously, that the first visit went to Kyiv, where maybe you mentioned he proposed the ceasefire. As he promised, it's more gathering information. So Hungary and Prime Minister, he stated also in an interview, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is aware of the fact that Hungary has no voice in a complex geopolitical issue in itself as it is, but he would like to use the rotating presidency to help the big players of the European Union by reporting on different issues. And the priority for Hungary with the rotating presidency, or one priority is to somehow arrive to a peace or facilitate the peace. So basically what Viktor Orban did is asked questions both from President Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin, whether it is possible to have a ceasefire first and thus stop the bloodshed and start peace talks, and what the following security architecture of the European security architecture would look like. So it is basically gathering information and channeling them to the big players. It's important to note that Volodymyr Zelensky thanked Hungary for signing the first peace summit document, and President Zelensky raised up the issue that Hungary might be part or even a protagonist of organizing a second peace summit.
Okay, but I would like you please to explain, because I'm a little confused, I'm sure many in our audience are as well. On the one hand, you're telling us that he's using Hungary's role as the in the presidency of the European Council as a launching pad for this fact-finding mission. On the other hand, we have very senior EU officials saying, I'm sorry, it has nothing to do with the EU. So which one is it? Does it have to do with the EU? Is this part of Hungary's presidency? And does he need a mandate in order to take this peace initiative forward?
Well, a mandate would mean that there are precise conditions, to precise answers to precise conditions or questions, and so on and so on. But it's only about gathering information. So it's not negotiating on terms. It's just about gathering information from both sides, both the Russian aggressor and Ukraine, and just to have these information together and put down on the table. As he said, currently the positions are very far, but after months of, let's say, steps when we saw that we are heading towards a possible escalation, this was a tiny little step to someone arrive to peace, which would be in the interest, according to Hungary, both of Ukrainian and both the EU, and especially our region, who needs a democratic, free and territory integral Ukraine to minimize the Russian threat on the eastern part of the region.
Indeed, you say it is probably in the EU's interest and Hungary's interest, but it also seems to be in Putin's interest. I mean, after all, the Prime Minister reflected a rift within the European Union in policy towards Russia. I mean, the optics don't look good, do they?
Well, it's anyone can decide how they evaluate the looks. From a Hungarian perspective, it's a diplomatic achievement that finally some kind of dialogue or logistics of a dialogue from an EU part is worked on. So the optics are that first he went to President Zelensky and then to Vladimir Putin. So basically, this can be a hope to achieve a peace someday. Please also know that Hungary is imminently touched by the war because there is a Hungarian minority living in Ukraine, so there are Hungarian souls already victims of the Russian aggression and the war. So and above the heroic Ukrainian victims. So at least to ponder about whether it's in interest of EU and Ukraine to stop the war and to have at least ceasefire and try to negotiate, which doesn't mean that Hungary would want to have a say in what the outcome will be. It's important that it cannot be achieved above the heads of the Ukrainian. That's why the first meeting was in Kyiv. So Ukraine has to have a say, because we see that Vladimir Putin, for example, is speaking about, in case of the win of Donald Trump, going to or negotiate in the White House. In the interests of the EU and Ukraine, it is that once we arrive to a possible peace talks, Ukrainian and the EU has also an important say in those peace talks.
Indeed. However, we know that, President Zelensky has said on many occasions that he doesn't want peace or ceasefire because it will simply allow Russia to regroup, rearm, and continue with the assault. And he has a point, doesn't he?
Yes, both sides say the same, that basically a ceasefire is impossible because it would just give an opportunity. So that's why Viktor Orban stated that currently the positions are far. But it's my own personal remark. But the fact that Volodymyr Zelensky could receive Viktor Orban, and evidently he knew about that this will be the question, and also the allies of President Zelensky knew about it, shows that those who are standing and supporting President Zelensky also in strategy making are perhaps open to at least ponder about a possibility of a ceasefire.
Understood. Well, there have been many talks, multinational, international talks. There was one recently hosted by President Zelensky in Switzerland. So the process is ongoing now. What else?
If you allow me,
yes, please go on.
Yes, but in the summit in Switzerland, there was only the one side represented. And this peace mission, these two bilateral meetings, was a series of meetings where both sides could express their views, and Prime Minister Viktor Orban will channel these information to the big decision makers of the EU.
Mm-hmm. Right. However, there's very little that the Prime Minister can do at this stage, apart from, as you say, gather some data. Now, this isn't the first what may be seen as a pro-Putin stance from the Prime Minister. He, for example, stood in the way of a unified EU response. to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He refuses to give material aid to Ukraine and so on. So, I mean, are we seeing a trend here that is more pro-Putin and less pro-EU?
President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his great gratitude for all the Hungarian help granted. The only help you mentioned that Hungary isn't granting Ukraine is lethal military aid, but also, for example, training health units of military. The biggest humanitarian aid, Viktor Orban expressed that all Ukrainians have to feel at home in Hungary. There will be Ukrainian schools opened up so that also children can learn in their mother tongue. If one will be needed, one. If 10, then 10. So it's no question whose side is Hungary taking. Also, it's true that you mentioned that, for example, also when we take the example of the sanction, on one hand, and in one interpretation, or the often quoted interpretation, that Hungary, I think you also used the phrase, stood in the way. But there is another way of interpretation I would suggest. For example, regarding the sanction, Hungary was always of a firm belief that the sanctions would not work because the Russian society is more endurable. The European economy is too weak to impose sanctions on Russia, and so on and so on. Nonetheless, Hungary was always ready to find a way so that the decision-making, the joint unanimous decision-making, could be found. You remember maybe the famous coffee of Viktor Orban when he left the negotiations style, so the others can take a unanimous decision. So you can twist and give another perspective to all these approach, namely that Hungary, although opposing the idea of certain measures, because in Hungary's position, it's not serving the interest of EU and Ukraine. Nonetheless, if the others want to go this way, Hungary is always ready to assist and find a way in which the country does not have to give up representing the Hungarian interests.
Understood. Well, thank you very much indeed, sir, for coming along and sharing your analysis of the situation with our audience. Do come back soon. Have a good evening.
Always an honor. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you. Dziękuję.